Media is very powerful in how people form their perceptions. And if you just think about, nuclear has had a bad rap since its inception, essentially. So I think it just takes a lot to undo that.
The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Hello, Dr. Hart. Thank you so much for joining me on the Tides of Nuclear podcast. It's truly a pleasure to have you on here.
I am very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And before we go on to have a conversation today, could you just introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Not a problem. So, my name is Dr. Jatia Hart. I am a nuclear engineer at Argonne National Laboratory, which is a Department of Energy laboratory. So, I work primarily for the Department of Energy and also for the National Nuclear Security Administration. My background, I have a bachelor's in industrial engineering and master's and PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Illinois. I started out in nonproliferation, looking at the fuel cycle, and I have since moved into technical analysis supporting national security. And I am a huge advocate of women in science and African Americans in science and other underrepresented groups.
How did you get involved in the nuclear industry? I saw a very interesting story while I was preparing for this interview, and I'm just wondering, what was your first experience or exposure to the nuclear sector?
Well, I'll tell you that I got into nuclear engineering quite by accident. So I really didn't even know what nuclear engineering was, but I was introduced to nuclear because I was in ROTC, Navy ROTC. And for one of our summer cruises, I went underway on a submarine. And here I was, a sophomore in college, and I was sitting between two missile silos, hundreds of feet under the water. And they also told me that the boat was powered by nuclear power. And I was like, well, that is impressive and dangerous. And who's watching this? So I was under the sea on a nuclear submarine, and I was sitting between two missile silos. And they also told me that the boat was powered by nuclear power. And I just thought this was so fascinating and also a little bit cool, a little bit dangerous. And I was like, well, who are the people who are in charge of this, making sure that it's used safely? And to me, that just piqued my interest, that safety and society and also the engineering aspect. So when I finished my industrial engineering degree, I decided to go into nuclear engineering specifically for nonproliferation, and to make sure that the world is safe.
Hmm. That is great. Before then, did you have any other opinions about the nuclear industry? Did you have any formed opinions about what you thought nuclear was and the role it was playing in the energy sector?
So I always tell the story that I couldn't even really pronounce nuclear right. So I was saying nuclear. And that was something, honestly, I didn't even learn until I went into grad school. So I had heard things, about nuclear bombs and that sort of thing. And growing up in the 90s, of course, there was the big weapons inspectors. Weapons inspectors were always on the TV with the IEA. I didn't quite understand what they were doing there, but I knew that they were doing something important and they were doing it to keep the world safe. So it popped up in different various avenues. And I knew it was something that was very important that needed attention.
And now you've gone on to do your master's and PhD in the sector. So now you're very familiar with everything that has to do with nuclear. And right now, with your work at Argonne National Labs, what do you see as the main focus points that you've had throughout your career? Because I understand that you've been through different sectors of specialization throughout your career so far.
So, the major issues as it pertains to my career is really the resurgence of nuclear power, building nuclear reactors in the US, preserving the US's leadership in the nuclear industry, and also doing that so not only we can have power and fuel our economy and our world, but also we can have a seat at the table when it is time to discuss the policies that surround securing nuclear material, securing nuclear power, and also using it for peaceful purposes.
Mhm. And a big part of the work you've done is about the nuclear fuel cycle, and it's something that it's in the conversation a lot more now. And you can say that there are many reasons for that. Climate change might be a factor, and the fact that nuclear is becoming more and more of an option when you look at clean energy. So, could you just talk about your work in the nuclear fuel cycle area?
Sure. So for my master's, I actually did a model of a research reactor that was at our university at the time. And I did a neutronics model to look at the isotopic material surrounding the core, to look at what the material would be comprised of for disposal. So that's what I did for my master's. Then, when I moved on to my doctoral dissertation work, I actually partnered with Idaho National Laboratory to look at the various reactor types at that time. Um, this was around GNEP. They were talking about these six major reactor types that could be deployed as Generation 4 reactors. And I basically built a systems dynamic model to look at if we plugged different reactors into the nuclear fuel cycle, what kind of waste would that make? There was a lot of talk about recycling and breeding and burner reactors. So, just looking at the isotopic balance of material that would come in and out of the reactor, and what did that mean for economics, and material throughput, and the isotopics, namely plutonium and uranium production or depletion, just to look at the options that we have.
And is this something that is being looked at right now at the Argonne National Labs? Is this one of the areas of focus of the work that you're doing there?
So, absolutely. So, that work still continues. I'm not specifically involved in that work, but I am peripherally involved in that work. So, I don't run the fuel cycle models anymore, but we have our nuclear engineering division at Argonne is still doing work on that area in the Advanced Fuel Cycle Initiative under the Department of Energy, and also working with the National Nuclear Security Administration. So, it's still an issue that's up for grabs. Um, and it varies depending on who's in power and what congressional funding we have, but it's a very real problem. We see that internationally that there are countries that are building reactors, namely China. We know in UAE they're getting ready to commission and start the operation of their first power reactor. And we see that the US is not the country that is being selected as the vendor to build these reactors or operate these reactors. So it's a very real issue to get us back into the game, in the reactor game, and also the fuel cycle game, because we have to figure out what we're going to do with the fuel, not only in the US, but we need to do it so that we can show that we can do it for others, because everybody is going to have to deal with their fuel. And I think we can do it safely. I think it's just an issue of making a policy decision and sticking to it.
Okay. And this is the 4th of August, and I saw, I don't know if it was yesterday or 2 days ago, that the UAE actually have gone ahead with their nuclear power plant, and it's such a big thing because this just shows that the rest of the world is starting to embrace nuclear as part of the energy mix and start to see it as something that's becoming more and more into not just for developed countries. It's something that's going ahead. And do you think there's a risk here where the US is kind of like losing ground in terms of the nuclear conversation? Because there's it's become a lot of a political issue in the last few years. And do you think this is something that's holding it back specifically in that sector?
Oh, nuclear has always been, in my opinion, a political issue. I don't think it's an issue of the technology. I think the technology is there. I think, especially in the US, the know how is there, even though our population of nuclear operators and that nuclear knowledge base is graying. I think it is more of a political issue, and having people who have environmental worries. Again, Fukushima didn't help us out very much with that issue, and you can see it all over in Japan where people are worried. I think what the public needs to realize is that with every energy source, there are going to be issues. If you have oil, there's oil spills. If you have gas, you have, natural gas flaring, and you have environmental issues. So even with wind power. So with wind power, you have windmills that's disrupting the environment. And so there is always going to be an issue with any energy source that you choose. So we can choose to decrease our energy usage, or we can mitigate our risks that come with the energy source we choose. And I think that the public perception of nuclear has given it really a bad rap. And I think if people understood that, living next to a coal plant, you actually get more radiation exposure than living next to a nuclear plant, I think they would have a better sense of that. But there's such a public perception issue with nuclear, and that's something that we really have to overcome.
And do you think closing out the nuclear fuel cycle and really showing the public that you can be accountable for every step of the nuclear fuel after it's been spent? Do you think this will go a long way in building that level of public trust and increase or put public opinion to the side of where the nuclear industry is right now?
So I think it would, but I think people underestimate the amount of public relations that nuclear needs to do. When you think of how long nuclear has been perceived as negative, and to the scale that nuclear energy and nuclear power has been perceived as negative, that's a lot to undo. So it is going to take a major campaign. I think that the nuclear industry has been great in winning over some key proponents from the environmental realm, but people have been talking about nuclear. They have been movies about nuclear fallout. So to undo that, you have to have movies about nuclear energy and the power. Associate with Iron Man, maybe. He has a reactor in his chest. I mean, it's really, I know it's interesting that we're going to cartoon characters, but media is very powerful in how people form their perceptions. And if you just think about, nuclear has had a bad rap since its inception, essentially. So I think it just takes a lot to undo that.
Mm. That's very true, and also with some of the extra work that you've done, especially in advising politicians in about issues relating to nuclear as well. Do you see that as more difficult in terms of just dealing with the science part of the industry as to dealing with the policymakers and the people who need to communicate that to the public and need to take it to the people where the decisions finally get made? Do you think that's a different challenge, or do you think it's just a bit of the same, just with different applications?
So I have had the good fortune of pivoting my career, because clearly I like to talk. Anybody who has met me knows that I really like to speak, and I have a gift for gab. And so I have had the good fortune of being able to be a briefer, an intelligence briefer, technical intelligence briefer to the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Perry. And I find that politicians, once you do explain how nuclear works and how energy policy works and give them the information that you have, I think they really get it. It's the time it takes to sit down and bring that up and get them up to speed. So I think everybody I've spoken to about nuclear energy gets it. It's just having that conversation. Like, there's many things that people want to talk about that rate higher than speaking about nuclear power and nuclear energy. So I think that's also a perception issue. It's the crowdedness and the lack of attention and attention span, really, to this issue when there's so many things that are going on.
That's very interesting. And speaking of bringing more of attention into nuclear, a big part of the work that you do right now is to advocate for getting young people involved in engineering degrees, especially into nuclear, and for people who are minorities as well. First of all, I just want you to talk about that because if you're just looking at demographic, I think you stand very much in the minority here because not just a woman in the nuclear industry, but also an African American woman as well. So what was that experience like early in your career, and did you see it as kind of like a deterrent initially to get into nuclear, or how did you go through that?
So, yes, the numbers are very low for African American women in nuclear engineering. I have a collection. We actually have a Facebook group now of African American women in nuclear engineering, and it's becoming more and more as my career goes on. I think our Facebook group might be up to like 15, so that's super exciting. As far as a deterrent, anybody who knows me knows that I am not easily deterred. So once I made my mind up that this is the avenue that I want to go, I was pretty set on that. I think it's been great that I have been able to find allies along the way who, even if they are not African American women, they're women or they're African Americans, and sometimes, they're white males, Asian males. That's the majority of the field who have taken an interest in my career, and I really value that. I think that there is a barrier because African Americans and women don't see people who look like them in the field. And we really, have underlying and unconscious bias to gravitate towards people who look like us. So that's why you see a lot of nurses who are women, and that's why you see a lot of teachers who are women. And that's why you see a lot of African Americans going into the entertainment business because they want to be with people who look like them. That's what they know. They say you can't be what you can't see. So I really try to push myself and be in front of the camera and communicate because I do want African Americans and women to see me as a nuclear engineer successful in the field and know that they also can go into this field or any other engineering field if they so choose. Have I had hurdles in my career? Yes, I think everybody has had hurdles in their career. However, I do feel like there have been special hurdles for me as an African American woman, just because of not only being a woman, but being African American and the intersectionality. Typically, people with my demographic background are usually support people. So I've been mistaken for secretaries a lot. And I also know I always make it a point when I am in a meeting to introduce myself as Dr. Jatia Hart. And I know to some people that may come off as pompous or, grandstanding. But when I come in the room, nobody thinks that. That is not what you immediately go to because that is unconscious bias. That's, really just what it is. And so I do feel like sometimes I am in a position where I do have to assert myself. And anybody who has ever been in a meeting with me and arguing an issue knows they have to come with their A game because I'm going to, come very hard. I'm going to have my facts, but I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just who I am. And that's what I've done to be successful.
And definitely, because you've had a very strong background in maths and sciences, and you've gone on to have a lot of recognition for the work you've done and the work you continue to do. And how much of that do you think setting that example and also nurturing young people as well to show them that this is something that is an option for them, and just reaching out, because sometimes it's people just need that extra push that, okay, this is something that you can do, and I think hearing it sometimes it goes a long way, more than people realize sometimes. I just want to get your take on that.
So I think that a lot of my colleagues and maybe they're growing to understand, but that if you are a white male or Asian male, there is a privilege that is built in the engineering fields and in the nuclear field as well. So I hear a lot of my colleagues say, "Oh, I just want to choose, the best candidate that applies for the position." But there are biases already built into that because you might have a connection through a university that is almost all white or Asian male, so you get white or Asian male candidates. So that is some privilege that is built into it. Also, those students who go into engineering usually typically are pushed by a professor or a family member or somebody that they know who is an engineer, which is typically, white and Asian males. So if you are an African American, just like me, engineering you get into late. You're really behind the ball. There are people who have had parents who are engineers or friends who are engineers who have been doing full on science fairs, since third grade. Whereas there might be a Black engineer or a woman engineer who, first picked this up in college because they picked it as a major. So you have to think about that. Why are the best candidates always white and Asian and male? Because that is bias that is built into our society. Can we overcome that? Yes, but it's going to take deliberate effort. So I encourage, and this is why I do it, I always reach out to minorities and people who are underrepresented in engineering and encourage them and push them, because you never know their background. You never know who has encouraged them or if they've ever been encouraged. Nobody even told me to apply for grad school or even told me about grad school or what it was until like my senior year. So, and I feel like I've done extraordinarily well in this field, and who else are we missing out on? So when I do my outreach, I'm thinking about the next Jatia, who is a person who has the innate skills and has the drive, but just hasn't been encouraged and hasn't been, given that thought to go on and to achieve, because really nuclear has a problem and we need everybody involved. We need a diversity, not only of people involved, but a diversity of thought. And we can't get that if we keep choosing the same people with the same background. We need to be innovative and we need to bring everybody we can in to solve this problem. So that's what I think about when I'm doing my outreach and I'm trying to mentor people. And I encourage everybody to reach out to somebody who you may not have a natural connection to, who is an underrepresented group, because we need those people to solve the problems that we have.
Hmm, definitely, I agree. And right now, I think the world is moving into a direction where there is there is more concern or there is more attention put to things regarding to inclusivity and just relating to things that people find very uncomfortable. Talking about race, talking about gender, talking about things that have been ignored for so long, but now it's pretty much being pushed to the forefront. And especially when it comes to nuclear, it's breaking nuclear out of this exclusivity bubble, if you will, that this is not something just for a select group of people, which I think it has been for of quite a while, quite a very long while. And there are many reasons for that going back years and years and years. But now this might be a good opportunity to really address all those things. And it's hard work also plays a large role, like you said. And right now, nuclear is in it's in a very interesting spot. There's a lot of things that need to happen in the next few years for it to be really established and to be to be where it needs to be, basically. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, from all the experience you've had, what do you think the main challenges are that you found in the nuclear industry that needs to be overcome for it to be a part of the regular conversations for normal people?
So it depends on if you're speaking internationally or domestically about the US. So I would say domestically in the US, we need to get a policy together, and figure out where we're going and point ourselves and orient ourselves in the direction. I think there needs to be a strong policy decision about nuclear industry and supporting the nuclear industry. And I think there have been many strides made, but I think it needs to be an all out campaign. We are nearing the end of many reactor lifetimes. So they did the 20-year extension, and the 20-year extension is almost up. So we need to think about if we're going to make that huge investment to keep our nuclear plants going. I live in Illinois in the Chicago area, and I think about 2/3 of our electricity comes from nuclear power. So that is a big deal. Internationally, I think there are some countries that are doing really well. Russia is building reactors. China is building reactors. India is building reactors. Bangladesh is building reactors. UAE, we just talked about them. Uh, so I think there are some countries that are moving ahead well. I think we need to make sure that the safety standards that the broader community, like the US, have adopted, make sure that they're adopted there. There are a lot of countries that are looking at nuclear power, and I just want to make sure personally that the US is in the conversation and other legacy nuclear powers are in the conversation. Japan is having issues, South Korea is having issues about whether they want to get their plants started. Japan has shut down a lot of their plants after Fukushima, and not many of them have come back online. So internationally, I think another issue that they need to look at, not only safety but disposal, and I think that's both internationally and domestically. So I think there's definitely things that need to be tackled, and I think the US needs to get what they're doing together so that they can be in the conversation.
Hmm. Speaking about this domestic issue, you mentioned disposal there. I think that that is also something that has been in the news quite a lot, and there doesn't really seem to be a solution in sight, at least in the near term. Uh, what factors do you attribute to this most that's causing this major roadblock in the way of this?
Yes. The domestic disposal. I wish I had an answer for you, Olu. I don't think it's a technical issue. I'll say that. I don't think it's a technical issue. I know that there is a lot of NIMBY, not in my backyard, that people don't want waste disposal sites located near them, even though there have been some strides in Texas and WIP and with Texas, New Mexico, I can't remember, but with the WIP facility. And I think we're unfortunately going to have to come together. Again, that's a policy issue. We have been trying to decide this issue for a very long time, and it is absolutely beyond me. I think that's going to take a very skilled politician or group of politicians to hash that out.
Okay, and just talking more about the work you've done so far, and what major projects do you look back on, and what major accomplishments do you look back on in your career as the moments where it just encouraged you greatly about the future of nuclear in the US and in the world in general?
So some of my most memorable projects had to do with international projects that I worked on. I had the good fortune of working on a safeguards exchange where I met in Ghana with some US colleagues and also people from, I believe it was Ghana, Nigeria, and some of the surrounding countries to discuss implementation of safeguards. That was really near and dear to my heart. Just because I was working with people who shared the same ethnic background as me, which doesn't happen a lot. They were people who really cared about what was going on in their country, and it was just inspiring to me to have the opportunity to travel there to help them and just to see all of the great work that they were doing. So that's one thing that really stands out. And then also my time as the briefer to Secretary Perry and also Secretary Brouillette, uh, to be able to answer the questions that they had, to brief them for White House meetings, and to be able to impart my technical knowledge to them. And both of them are really sharp and really care about the issues that they're dealing with. So that was great. Their staffs were great. And it was really my opportunity to see kind of how the sausage is made, which just inspired me even more to know that it takes people who have good people around them doing the work and informing them to go into these meetings and make very important decisions. It just made me want to support them and help them and be successful. And it also, I felt like, showed me my future and the steps that I want to take to one day be in the room
Mm, that's very
making the
well.
decisions.
Mm. Uh, is that a preface there to a future in politics for the future of your career? Is that what you're saying?
I have no idea, Olu. I'm not that big of a planner. So I'll say that. Like I want to be like, yes, I have it all planned out, but I never have anything planned out. I don't necessarily want to be a politician. um because it just seems like a thankless job. But I would love to be a politician's technical advisor. I just don't think, like, as much as, I look fantastic on camera, Olu, I know it. But I just think I am better at a behind the scenes position supporting a principal.
Hmm. And just going on that note, talking about the highlights, what excites you for the future of the nuclear industry? What do you look at happening right now that makes you think that okay, this could turn out great in the next few years? And what just makes you really excited to talk to young people about? Because I know a lot of young people care more about innovation because the tech industry is really taking off. So, what really excites you to talk about, and what are you watching closely for the next few years in the nuclear industry?
Well, what really excites me is the new generation. I think the new generation, millennials and Gen Z, yeah, right, millennials or Gen Y, right? So the new generation really excites me, the millennials and Gen Z, because I think that they have this very fresh take on things, including environmental issues and racism, and also nuclear. I think I've seen polls that the younger you are, the more supportive you are of nuclear power. So I'm really looking forward to the day where we have the younger generation who understands that there are trade-offs in energy sources, and any energy sources has pros and cons. And I think they are really attuned and aware to that. So I am really excited about them getting into the field. Again, I said there's more and more diversity. The US is moving to a majority minority society. So that also kind of fuels my spirit. A lot of the baby boomers, with their infinite knowledge, work with a ton of them, are getting ready to retire. So there's going to be this shift, and it's very exciting and invigorating.
Mm, that's very well said. Dr. Jitia Hart, thank you so much for joining me on Tides of Nuclear Podcast. It has truly been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.